Hello and welcome to the Time of Telling. I'm Mark Walker, and this podcast is based on my unpublished manuscript, The Time of Telling, John Starr Cook and the Word of One Tarot. It is also now based on another unpublished manuscript, The Lion's Tale, The Magical Tale of John Starr Cook by Rosalind Sharp Wall. I'd like to extend my gratitude to Rosalind's son Chris and daughter Michaela for their permission to incorporate this previously lost material into the narrative. There is a lot of new information in The Lion's Tale, particularly around the mysterious word TORIRUT. Now, this explanation of TORIRUT turned up at the right time. In the last episode, The Perfect Jewel in its Perfect Setting, we featured John's screed in Oracle number 9 from August 1967. John's screed mentions TORIRUT five times. 1. This is in John's screed in the Oracle, which we've already seen. Anyway, quoting from John's article, the books of T, or the books of TORIRUT, commonly known as tarot. The second reference, the books of TORIRUT, or tarot. Number 3, the books of TORIRUT. Number 4, this new edition of the books of TORIRUT. And number 5, the new books of TORIRUT. So, TORIRUT is a word that equates with tarot. But what is the origin of this word? As I mentioned, The Lion's Tale explains this and much more. And the best way to convey this explanation is to read that part of The Lion's Tale, which I'll do over the next few episodes. Before I start, however, I have a quick quote from William Burroughs from Rub Out the Words, the Letters of William S. Burroughs. Burroughs wrote to Brian Gyson in early 1970. Among other things, he talked about John Cook. Quote, "My first article on Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard, was published in Rat and in Mayfair here in London. I sent a copy to John Cook and received a most amusing letter, oh so bitchy, about Ron, who is due for a crack-up, John thinks. I hope I am there to help him over the hump, even though he failed me when I needed him. I am not bitter, I love him, and I really do." He goes on to tell how he himself, Hubbard, became a dithering child when confronted by a group of top people at Attlee's house. Attlee, Clement Attlee, the former Prime Minister. In brackets it says, "Please, John, the guest list. Does it read, killed while cleaning his gun, heart attack, car accident?" Bracket. I showed Anthony Balch, the letter, and he commented on its compulsive readability. "This is Thay Himmer stepping right out of your pages." Now, John sent me his play Phoenix, and it is terrible because he is trying to be literary. If he would write his personal memoirs of the magic world, Hubbard, Subud, the lot, and the bitchier the better, it could be a very funny book and could sell the process. It's like Doc Benway shows up and writes a book, 40 Years a Croaker. And so to The Lion's Tale. To quickly set the scene, it's 1949. John was married to Millen, and they were both getting into Dianetics in New York. Mary Osa turned up from Switzerland, and then John and Millen separated, with John accompanying Mary back to Geneva, where he was to use Dianetics on her husband Peter, a great-grandson of John D. Rockefeller. The process suggests that they bought a Ouija board on the way to the airport. And so, no, I lost the page. And so to The Lion's Tale, Chapter 5, The Search for the Tea Tree. It was December 5, 1949, that John Cook left New York for Geneva with Mary Osa. Less than 3 weeks later, on the day before Christmas, he was in Africa, embarked upon a fantastic quest, one that was to keep him on the African continent for the next 7 years. It all came about through the Ouija board. John had been in Geneva only 2 weeks when he, Peter, and Mary Osa, and their friend Daniel, decided to try the Ouija board one night after dinner. Tired of the arduous, emotionally exhausting work of doing Dianetics runs, they were in the mood for something different. One who called himself Matthew T was the communicant of the board. He told the group of 4 that the world was in danger, and they had been chosen to save it. To avert an impending atomic catastrophe, they were to go to Angola, and they had to be there by December 25, Christmas Day. Once in Angola, Peter was to buy an emerald and 2 diamonds, then proceed to a place called Kasinga and search for a tea or TEA plantation. Their overall commission was to find TORIRUT. The strange word TORIRUT was repeated several times throughout the communication. It was of the utmost importance that they tell no one of their mission or where they were going. They were all to simply disappear, drop out of sight. And Peter was to get $200,000 out of the United States and wire it ahead, as well as taking plenty of cash. He ended up taking around $35,000 in cash. The Angola destination, above all, had to be held top secret, except for the bank, travel agents, and such. None of them had ever heard of Angola. Angola had not been in the news in 1949 as it was in the 70s, and at first they doubted its existence. The whole thing sounded insane. Where could it be? Cambodia, perhaps? The name sounded vaguely Cambodian, or it might be Mongolian, or in Afghanistan, or, who knows, maybe it had once existed on the lost continent of Atlantis. Finally, Peter remembered seeing an old map in the Geneva house, so they decided to dig it up and consult it. Peter said, "If Angola does exist, maybe we should take this seriously." Finally, after looking for Angola in various parts of Asia, they located it on the west coast of Africa, the old slave coast. So Angola did exist. Maybe this extraordinary message was for real. they returned to the board to consult with Matthew T. They pointed out that it would be impossible to meet the conditions. It was already December 20. December 25 was only 5 days away. It was the wrong time of year, being the holiday season, to get plane reservations for Africa. One had to book well in advance, and Peter could not possibly get such a large sum of money out of the United States at such short notice. It would take at least a week, probably longer. Above all, the crowning argument, Peter could not go no matter what. He was to be drafted into the Swiss army by the first of the year. He was a Swiss citizen. These objections were lightly dismissed by Matthew T, who told them there were no obstacles. Everything would be taken care of. Get going, he spelt out the words on the alphabet board. An atom bomb is at your tail. They were inevitably impressed by this talk of an atom bomb. Who knew what the world powers were up to behind the scenes? It seemed especially significant that they were getting this message in Geneva, a centre of world peace and the former site of the League of Nations. They decided that if the conditions could be met, they would go. Almost in the spirit of a lark, the next day they started making the various arrangements. Incredibly, every obstacle melted in their path, including the seemingly insuperable one, Peter's military service. He got a 60-day deferment merely by asking for it. However, it was not until December 23 that they were able to get plane reservations. This gave them only 2 days to get to Angola. And from Brazzaville in the Congo, where they would land on December 24, there were no planes to Luanda, the capital of Angola, for another 2 weeks. They decided to chance it. After all, everything had worked out so far, including getting $200,000 out of the States. Obviously, some mysterious force was behind all this, and they would have to trust it. From now on, the story reads like a fairy tale, or the adventures of a group of madcaps. Certainly, it could not have happened if Peter Osa had not been a multi-millionaire, and it is equally certain that they would not have responded to the challenge posed by the Ouija board if they had not all been quite young. John Cook was the old man of the crew at 29. The rest were in their early 20s, Mary being the youngest at 21. Mary, in fact, was the reigning queen of the group, whose every command, second to the Ouija board, was law. All 3 men were in love with her, and she with them. Although she was overweight, nearly 200 pounds, she carried it off with majesty, and indeed exercised a fatal fascination on men wherever she went. She was a Reed College graduate, had been born in the Midwest, but lived all over the United States, and was part Cherokee Indian. Several years later, I'm not going to mention that, the account continues in John's words. But since they were on tape, not in written version, it is paraphrased here. Okay. The group of 4 arrived in Brazzaville at dawn on December 24, 1949. As John related, it was hot, wet, a sticky Congo feeling about the whole place. We got out of the plane only to discover that the airport wasn't open yet. So we went into a little cafe, still not knowing how we were going to get to Angola the next day, and we ordered sweet rolls and coffee. The answer came in a few minutes. A little private plane landed at the airport, and the pilot came into the cafe for breakfast. Peter and Mary got into conversation with him in French, which John did not understand at the time, and explained their plight. They were headed for Angola. They wanted to be there on Christmas Day, but there were no planes for Angola for the next 2 weeks. "No problem," said the pilot. "If you have money, you can hire me to pilot you there across the river in Leopoldville, where I'll be stationed tonight." As in Geneva, where this whole extraordinary thing had started, their needs had been answered as though by magic. They took a taxi into Brazzaville and stayed in a beautiful hotel on a hill overlooking the ocean. "We slept most of the day," John recalled, "because we'd been up all night the night before, looking out of the plane over the Sahara and the beautiful Nigerian country." But that evening around sunset, the drums began. And in one part of the village below us was this African drumming and chanting, and from the other side of the hill were coming Christian hymns and carols. It was an extraordinary juxtaposition of religious feeling and fervour, of the drumming and the hymn singing from the other side. The next morning they got up before dawn and went to the edge of the Congo River. Christmas morning, and their second morning in Africa. "I'll never forget the sun coming up while we were getting into this big dugout canoe," John told, "and being paddled across the river, as the sun was brilliantly pink and birds were flying all over the place, cranes and fantastic birds that we'd never seen before. It was one of those very magical moments in my life." But once at Leopoldville Airport, John suddenly became panicky. The Ouija board had specifically told them to tell no one where they were going. Up till this moment, John, along with the rest, had obeyed this injunction. But now, "For some reason I felt hysterical," said John. "I felt we were all going to be killed." So he surreptitiously bought 2 postcards and wrote on each of them 2 million in a kind of cipher language. On one he said, "We are going to the place of the movie we saw the last time I saw you in New York." This had been King Solomon's Mines. On the other he wrote, "I'm not sure if you'll ever see or hear from any of us again." He posted the cards quickly, still feeling they were all in great danger, and got into the little plane. It was not long before his forebodings were realized. Over Makawala, the only small airport between Leopoldville and Luanda, the engines began misfiring. The pilot decided to land, and just as they touched ground, the motor began to go up in flames. He put it out with a fire extinguisher, but said they could not go on to Angola. Obviously, the plane was in bad shape and wouldn't make it. They would have to stay in Makawala for repairs. The group sat down and got out the Ouija board. "Now what do we do?" Matthew T. replied, "Bribe him. Just keep going. Pay no heed." So Peter bribed the pilot with an additional $200, and reluctantly he agreed to continue the flight. But no sooner had he started up the motor than it again burst into flames, and once again he had to put it out with the fire extinguisher. This time he was adamant. He absolutely would not go on. Again, the group turned to the Ouija board as the pilot tinkered with the plane. It said, "Keep going. Bribe him more." This time, Peter gave him $500. The pilot unhappily gave in. "All right, but I don't think we're going to make it." "Of course we're going to make it," they cried. So they all got into the plane, and this time it worked. No more flames. And they arrived at Luanda Airport on Christmas Day, exactly on schedule. The airport officials were quite suspicious of the little group of foreigners. Why would they be going to Luanda, of all places, on Christmas Day? It made no sense. But, at length, after much questioning, they were let through and directed to what was supposedly the best hotel in Luanda. It was one of the most hideous hotels I've ever been in, John related. All cement and blaring music constantly being played over huge megaphones. Quite a contrast to the beautiful hotel on the hill in Brazzaville the night before. And the whole place felt eerie. In the newspaper that morning, it was reported that the Portuguese had bombed a whole settlement of Africans in vengeance for one Portuguese being killed by some Negro from, they thought, that village. They weren't even sure of that. The whole city of Luanda had a feeling of hate and ugliness and cement. And there were red ponciana trees in bloom, and it was hot and ugly. The feeling was really nasty. I can't describe how hideous it was at the time, and everything was mud. The roads were mud. Tracks of mud went through the cement floors of the hotel from the people walking in the street. Oh, it was so ugly, said John. That night in the hotel, John was sharing a room with Daniel, and Peter and Mary were in the adjacent room. In the middle of the night, Peter suddenly appeared in the room where John and Dan were sleeping. "Come quickly, we've been under attack." They learned that Mary and Peter had been awakened to find a crocodile in their room. They both saw, or thought they saw, or were hallucinating a crocodile in their room, which they thought was real. Finally, they had somehow gotten rid of it, but they were still shaken and wondering if it had disturbed us too. It wasn't too surprising with the feeling of that city to have something of this kind happen. This was their first contact with a crocodile, or the crocodile symbol. It was not to be their last. There would be several more in the very near future as they came closer to the mysterious TORIRUT and the tea tree. And before John left West Africa, he was to have a final one whose effects would haunt him for years to come. A final encounter with a crocodile, that is, which would haunt him for years to come. And we'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much for watching. This is the time of telling, and the lions tell.